All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever been told that science and morality are just two completely different things? That science can tell us how the world is, but it can never ever tell us how we ought to live? Well, today we are diving into Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape, a book that basically says, hold on, that's completely wrong. He argues that science absolutely can be our guide on moral questions. So let's see how he builds that case. So, here's our roadmap. First, we're going to tackle that old idea of a wall between facts and values and why that's a problem. Then, we'll get into Harris's big idea, building morality on the foundation of well-being. From there, we'll explore his central metaphor of the moral landscape, deal with the elephant in the room, disagreements, and finally, see what this all means for the path forward.
Okay, so let's start with this supposed wall. For a long time, a core idea in philosophy and science has been this massive split between objective facts and subjective values.
On one side of the wall, you've got facts. This is science's playground, right? It's objective, it describes reality, what is. It can tell us about gravity, about biology, all of it. But then on the other side, you have values. This is supposedly the world of morality, of what we ought to do. And the traditional view says this is totally subjective, a place science just can't touch.
But here's the twist. Harris argues that this clean separation creates a huge problem. If morality has no connection to facts, it leaves us in a really tricky spot, especially if we're trying to figure out right and wrong without relying on religion.
Harris calls it a sinkhole. It's a powerful image, isn't it? He says that by cutting values off from facts, any attempt at a secular, rational morality loses its footing. You're basically left with two pretty bad options. Either you get your morals from rigid religious dogma, or you slide into relativism, where you can't actually say that, for example, a society built on compassion is objectively better than one built on cruelty.
So, if that old foundation is a sinkhole, what do we build on instead? Well, this is where Harris proposes a new foundation, something solid and real. The concept of well-being. To get us there, he uses a thought experiment. Just imagine two opposite worlds. In one, you have the good life. This is a universe where every conscious being experiences the greatest possible flourishing. Then you have the bad life, a universe of the worst possible suffering for everyone, for no reason. Now here's the key question. Is there a meaningful difference between these two worlds? The answer seems like an obvious yes.
And that's the foot in the door. The second we admit that there's a real, actual difference between a world of maximum misery and a world of maximum flourishing, we've admitted something huge. We've admitted that some outcomes are objectively worse than others. And if that's true, then there must be right and wrong answers to moral questions, answers that are tied to the well-being of conscious minds.
This brings us to the core metaphor of the whole book, the moral landscape. Let's look at how this gives us a totally new way to think about morality.
Think about medicine for a second. We all kind of agree that the goal is health. And what do we use to achieve that goal? The science of medicine. Now, is our definition of health absolutely perfect? No. Does it change over time? Of course, but that doesn't stop doctors and scientists from making real, measurable progress.
Harris's big claim is that we can approach morality in the exact same way. The goal is well-being for conscious creatures. The method to get there is a science of morality. So the moral landscape is this vast space of possibilities, with peaks representing states of great flourishing and deep valleys representing states of terrible suffering. He sees this project in 3 steps. First, science can just describe how humans behave morally. That's anthropology, psychology. But the really important part is step 2, using science to determine which behaviors and ways of thinking we should follow to actually hit those peaks of well-being. And finally, step 3 is convincing people to get on board with those better moral strategies. Okay, but this brings us to the biggest, most common objection you hear. What about disagreements? I mean, come on, how could we ever agree on what well-being even is? This really is the heart of the pushback, right? Who defines well-being? Isn't it just a matter of opinion or culture? If one group truly believes their way of life leads to the most well-being, who are we, with our science, to say they're factually wrong? Harris's response here is brilliant. He flips the question right back around and points to medicine again. He says, look, the idea of health is also a bit fuzzy. There are debates, but does anyone seriously use that fuzziness to argue that medicine isn't a science? We don't demand absolute perfect certainty to fight cancer, so why do we demand it from morality? He offers another great analogy. We all have a kind of intuitive physics.
You drop a ball, it falls down. But our intuitions about physics are often dead wrong when it comes to things like quantum mechanics or relativity. Harris argues it's the same with morality. We have an intuitive morality, but our gut feelings about right and wrong can be flawed, biased, and in desperate need of an upgrade from a more scientific understanding of what actually makes people thrive.
So where does this all lead? What's the big takeaway here? Let's talk about the path forward and why thinking about morality this way really matters. So let's wrap it up. The big idea is that this wall between facts and values might just be an illusion. If we use the well-being of conscious creatures as our foundation, an objective standard, we can imagine a moral landscape with real peaks and valleys. And most importantly, science, from neuroscience to sociology, can be our map and compass to navigate it. This changes everything. It means moral progress isn't just wishful thinking. It becomes a rational, achievable goal.
And that's really the final provocative thought to leave you with. If we stop seeing morality as a set of ancient, unchangeable rules and instead see it as a scientific exploration, well, it changes the entire conversation. It's no longer about winning an argument. It becomes a shared project of discovery. It turns morality from something that ends conversations into maybe the most important conversation we could ever have.